Welcome to the Future Knowledge Podcast and our special summer series on vanishing culture, brought to you by me, Vida, and the Internet Archive. We're talking with the archivists, librarians, and creators fighting to preserve our shared cultural history.
Hey listeners, I'm Dave Hansen.
And I'm Chris Freeland. This is Future Knowledge.
A note as we start up. We're sharing a special 6-part weekly series called Vanishing Culture, exploring what's at risk of being lost in the digital age and why preservation matters.
The series is inspired by Vanishing Culture, the new book from the Internet Archive. You can read it online for free at archive.org or find it in print at your favorite bookstore.
And now, on with today's episode.
Today, we're kicking off the series by exploring what is meant by vanishing culture. Why does culture vanish? And why does it matter? I'm Vida, a musician and an artist. In this podcast series, I'll be finding out more about public access to culture and how to preserve it for future generations. Join me as I learn from the experts about threats to preservation in the digital age and what happens when culture vanishes. This week, I'm talking to Luca Messarra, a researcher, book historian, and a literary sociologist. In his doctoral research at Stanford University, Luca uses humanist tools and methods to investigate digital questions, such as the preservation of video games or the availability of music. He's also the author of the Internet Archive's Vanishing Culture report, which explores how corporate interests, shifting distribution models, and malicious cyber attacks are threatening public access to our shared cultural history in today's digital landscape. I asked Luca what we mean by vanishing culture and why it matters.
So in a sentence, vanishing culture to me refers to the sort of seamless, causeless disappearance of cultural objects, particularly in digital environments. We talk a little bit about analog culture, and that certainly plays a role as well. But the term vanishing culture really started to emerge around the disappearance of things like the MTV News archive or MySpace, where all of a sudden these archives of culture would just disappear and vanish without any sort of real cause. And so there's kind of a sort of magician uptake to a lot of what we're describing with the term vanishing culture. And vanishing to me is important because it's stressing the gerund, the ing there is stressing process. So a lot of what we were interested in the report was sort of demystifying the processes around the disappearance of these objects. People might ask, why is it that MTV News went down? Why is it that I can access some books from the 1800s super easily, but I can't access some books from, say, 1950 really easily? And the report was aimed at sort of demystifying and getting at why that process happens in the first place. I have a lighthearted and fun story of vanishing culture, and then I'm going to talk about a more sort of serious and somber version. The lighthearted version is that I'm a home cook, and I like cooking for fun and learning more about different recipes. And one day, maybe 5-6 years ago, I discovered this awesome biscuit recipe on YouTube, and it was like the best biscuits I'd ever made. It was like this barely watched video too. It only had a couple thousand views. It was like in the depths of YouTube. And I made it for my family. I made it for my fiance, and they were all pumped and like, wow, these are like the best biscuits I'd ever had. And me being silly, trusting in YouTube as an archive when it's really not, I never actually wrote down the recipe. And one day I tried to go to the YouTube video and it's just gone. And people in my family are freaking out. They're like, where are the biscuits, Luca? Those biscuits were so good. Are we never going to be able to eat them again? I'm like, I'm sorry. But then there's a hopeful part to this. The Internet Archive. So I used the Wayback Machine, and thankfully the Wayback Machine backed up the biscuit recipe. So now the biscuits are able to flow freely, which is wonderful. So it didn't fully vanish. The Internet Archive saved the day, which is wonderful. The more sort of serious and somber meditation on vanishing culture is that I was having a conversation with my fiance's father shortly after the report came out, because I was asking him about the report and what he thought of it. And he played a lot of early video games back in the day. And he was talking about how those sort of early video games are going to be instrumental pretty soon for an entire generation of adults who might eventually suffer from dementia. And in the case of treating dementia patients, it's really wonderful for them to have things that are nostalgic to them, things that they played with when they were kids. And this is a very real case of vanishing culture seriously harming the health of older adults who might not be able to access the things that they grew up with and played with, the things that bring them warmth and comfort. They might not be able to access them. And to me, that's tragic and sad. So I think anybody who's familiar with the long history of archives and of history in general understands that archives and libraries can be sites of profound joy and memory for some people, but they are also sites of immense loss and violence. Sometimes that loss and violence is invisible, based around sort of intentional absences and gaps that are in the archive. And sometimes it is visible when archives are literally destroyed or bombed. Community control over archives, I think, is really pivotal for groups to be able to tell their own autonomous stories and histories of why they exist, who they are, and how they lived. And the fact of ongoing cultural destruction in Gaza and Ukraine, as I speak right now, reminds us that I think preservation is not only about having access to entertainment or fun things. Cultural preservation is also very much a real matter of life and death and memory for real living human beings whose living and material memory are being destroyed every single day. And so when we talk about vanishing culture, yes, I mean things like media decay and open access software, but I also mean in a very sincere and important way the fundamental importance of preserving human life, communities, and dignity. And that is why the report advances a humanist take on the topic rather than a strictly technological one, because it allows us to expand the category of vanishing to something beyond books and media, to the category of human life itself.
Luca mentioned demystifying the processes around the disappearance of cultural objects, and I was interested to learn more. Why does culture vanish? And is the problem unique to the digital age? Who are the people and institutions involved in these processes of vanishing? He explained how current copyright laws can make it harder for memory institutions and communities to preserve culture.
So the story of It's a Wonderful Life, I think, has a lot to offer to the conversation around vanishing culture, both in terms of the content of the story itself, but also its larger story of how it became popular. A sort of recap for people who haven't read the report yet. So the film comes out in 1946. It's released by Republic Pictures. And at the time when it was released, it was guaranteed copyright protection for 28 years, so up to 1974. And then they had an option to renew that copyright for another 28 years. For whatever reason, we don't really know why. We think that maybe it was a clerical error. It could have totally been intentional too. Republic Pictures didn't renew their copyright over the film. And so subsequently in 1974, it became available to play cost-free on television. Also, it's important to note that in 1946, when the film comes out, it gets some critical commentary, but then it's quickly kind of forgotten. In some respects, it's kind of a commercial failure. And so people aren't really watching or talking about It's a Wonderful Life after it initially comes out. Come 1974, the film becomes available to play sort of cost-free. There's a small royalty that I think people have to pay for the soundtrack, but by and large, televisions were able to play it for free around Christmas time. And then after that, it became this sort of like huge Christmas hit for Americans in particular, because it was available on television and everybody was watching it. And so the moral of the story is that it can really take a long time before a work is seen as culturally significant. Art historians, cultural historians know this. People like Faulkner, for example, his early novels, The Sound of the Fury, commercial failures. They didn't become successful until many years after they were published. Van Gogh, classic example of a painter who made these remarkable and amazing paintings. I believe he only sold 2 in his lifetime. So it can take many, many years for a work to become popular. And copyright can unfortunately play a lot of harm in preventing access to that work, especially when it's so long. So right now, copyright is life plus 70 years of the author, or 95 years in the case of works made for hire. And so if It's a Wonderful Life took 95 years before it was in the public domain, it might not even exist anymore because it was printed on 35 millimeter film, which deteriorates very quickly. As we know from the case of It's a Wonderful Life, as we know from the case of the film industry, which used to sack all of its old 35 millimeter films when they were no longer played, we cannot rely on corporations to ensure that cultural works are going to be around, because corporations operate according to a profit model, which is fine. They're totally welcome to do that. The public domain is what allows us to teach Mary Shelley's Frankenstein or to watch old Charlie Chaplin films, and to continue to teach them and make them available and to share them. We have that public domain, and it's available and rich and robust from the early 20th century to the past, to before that. But everything after that, let's say from 1940 or so up to the present, is stuck under the control of copyright. And it means that things are limited in their ability to circulate and be distributed and be shared and be remembered.
I was interested to hear more about the role of corporations in vanishing culture, particularly when it comes to digital artifacts, like the video games Luca mentioned earlier. So much of our collective memory now exists as photos or posts on corporate-owned social media platforms. How does this complicate the issue?
The fact of the matter is that commercial platforms such as YouTube are run primarily for profit. They don't have the public interest at heart. And so if they receive like a takedown, they're not going to bother really looking into that takedown request. They're just going to immediately take things down. So things can disappear very easily from platforms like YouTube. And then there are other platforms where this has sort of happened in the past. So Flickr is a really great example where people used to upload thousands and thousands of photos to Flickr because for some reason they made it available for people to just continue to upload pictures for free onto their website as a commercial platform. It's an interesting decision, but that's what they chose to do. But then eventually they realized that they couldn't afford to continue hosting everybody's photos online because it was really expensive. And so one day they decided they're going to cap people with free accounts to 1,000 photos. And they would begin deleting the oldest photos on people's accounts past 1,000. And so maybe some people who were, still responsive to their emails or like remember even what email they used to register for Flickr were able to get the message and were able to transfer some of their pictures off. But I'm sure a lot of people weren't able to do so, and they ended up losing a lot of their pictures through Flickr's decision. So these companies like Flickr, YouTube, MySpace, they're always going to have their own interests at heart as opposed to the public's. And even though they might seem like very public-oriented repositories, because anybody can kind of just upload an account, anybody can create an account and then upload material to these sites, the fact of the matter is that they're not. And it's important that the public knows that.
I was wondering about institutions like libraries, museums, and archives. What role do they have in preserving culture in the digital age? Luca explained that it can be difficult for them to continue their age-old preservation efforts due to corporations challenging their right to own digital artifacts. Why is it important to own media rather than just stream it on platforms such as Netflix?
In the past, we had these things called libraries. The libraries would do the work of preserving and making things available, and they can only do that work through ownership. They can't do that work if things are licensed to them or streamed to them, and they're not allowed to make a purchase and own these works. Ownership ensures that censorship and surveillance doesn't happen over our access to materials. Censorship in particular has happened in the case of 1984 or the Roald Dahl publications. So there's been this interesting phenomenon where I believe 1984 was taken offline of the Kindle library, which is beautifully ironic because it's 1984 and it's about vanishing culture in the first place. Kindle users randomly woke up one day and 1984 was missing from their Kindles, even after they had purchased it. In the case of surveillance, there's this great report that I talk about in the Vanishing Culture report, but it is about the connected television industry, so things like the Roku TV, and how they use a lot of surveillance practices and their data collection for when people are watching their televisions. So when we own our materials, when we own our VHSs, when we own our CDs, we are free from government or state or corporate surveillance. And lastly, I think that ownership allows subcultural expression to exist because it's really ownership that allows these sort of fringe and unpopular things to be distributed and shared in smaller communities. The example that I talk about in the report is the case of cult films. So things like Dazed and Confused, which had a sort of like, it wasn't exactly a commercial failure, but it wasn't ridiculously popular at the time it came out. When VHSs were around and popular, people could share Dazed and Confused with their friends. They could have like at-home screens with their friends. And then it really sort of flourished as this cult film that became popular as a result of those sort of smaller TV showings. That sort of thing about cult fans coming together and sharing the things they care about can't happen with streamed content. I think Julia Ziskina and Kyle Courtney offer a really great overview of this problem that I would advise any listener to check out. It's called The Publisher's Playbook. You could view it on SSRN, I believe. And what they do is they do a long history of the rights of libraries across the 20th century. And they discover that the rights of libraries are really only secured when publishers sue libraries for their practices of making texts and objects more accessible and available to patrons. As new technology comes out that promotes accessibility, libraries adopt it, and publishers immediately start suing to prevent it. So this is a common pattern in the way in which library rights have sort of happened in the 20th century, and it's going to continue happening in the 21st century. What I think is stopping us from building a similar legal framework for digital archives as we have for physical archives today, I think that there's a lot of nuanced responses that I could offer to that question. But as somebody who isn't a lawyer, I'm going to offer the kind of like bombastic and sort of most diagnostician response. And that's simply that I think that powerful monopolies can put forward a lot of money into lobbying politics, preventing us from making these sort of legal frameworks that protect digital access in the first place. The fact of the matter is that the Copyright Term Extension Act in 1998, which extended copyright up to the length that it is today, it was colloquially called the Mickey Mouse Bill. And that's because Disney lobbied heavily and successfully to promote and get the bill through Congress, because Steamboat Willie was about to be made available into the public domain. Frankly, Vida, I think that our current legal regime is more interested in ensuring profit for middlemen publishers and conglomerates than they are for ensuring actual creators can flourish, or about the general public can have long-term access to cultural works, both of which I would say are the original intended goals of copyright in the first place, for the public to have access to works.
I asked Luca what he thinks we can do about this situation. How can you, our listeners, fight against vanishing culture? What are Luca's hopes for the future of cultural preservation?
I think that a future-facing cultural preservation infrastructure has to be a lot of different internet archives. So right now we have the Internet Archive, and it's wonderful and it's amazing. But the fact of the matter is the Internet Archive is under legal threat. It's under technological threat through DDoS attacks. And they're going to keep on fighting, and that's great. But if we are really interested in a future-facing cultural preservation infrastructure, we need a lot of different internet archives. We need a lot of different communities that are uploading their cultural objects online and making them available for people to download and view and share. If you are a member of the public and you want to be involved in cultural preservation, you should get a library card and you should use it. That's a great way to help support libraries. I think that they're chronically underfunded. Make sure all of your friends get library cards and use them. If you're a member of the public and you want to support preservation efforts, you should encourage your favorite creators to think about the longevity of their work. You should encourage them to upload their work to the Internet Archive.
So now, I feel like I'm beginning to grasp the meaning of vanishing culture. Luca definitely has an exciting perspective when it comes to the role of public culture and how crucial it is for our ability to understand ourselves. Listening to Luca made me reflect on how our current attitude towards culture is shaped by for-profit thinking, and how there could be alternative ways of sharing more generously among artists, makers, and anyone in the public. Now that I've learned about the problem of vanishing culture from Luca, I'm excited to meet people who've been impacted by it or are developing solutions. Over the next 5 episodes, we'll hear from people on the front lines of vanishing culture, from an artist working with queer archives, to a historian preserving African folklore, to a women's literature scholar writing about old cookbooks. Join us again next time when we'll be talking to Kate Livingston about preserving food culture.